Dr. Kevin Runions is recognized in Australia and internationally for his research excellence and significant influence on school-based adolescent mental health and well-being and bullying prevention policy and practice. Kevin's research has focused on how to reduce school-based risks such as bullying and victimization and mechanisms to reduce the risks faced by students with chronic health conditions such as asthma, hearing loss, and rare diseases. He's also established broad expertise in the biopsychosocial aspects of mental health and mental illness across development. Kevin is also an expert in school implementation of tiered interventions, having led numerous large school-based intervention trials. Australian colleagues remain sad losing Kevin's expertise, leadership, and sense of humor nearly a year ago to his current role in Canada, where he serves as area lead for research, evaluation, and monitoring at school mental health in Ontario. Kevin, come on up here and join me. Great to have you. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thanks.
All the best.
Appreciate it. All right. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so my name's Kevin Runyon, and what it's saying right there is technically not true, but I recently was head of school and community well-being at Telethon Kids Institute. When they asked me to do this, I was that, but I'm just not that anymore. I'm going to be talking about other humans involved in the implementation of school bullying prevention programs and trying to provide some ideas, thinking about how to formulate what might need to be done in the future. So I don't have a great body of evidence that I'm going to be drawing upon. I'm going to be trying to pitch some new ideas and see where they land. So yeah, I've had a complicated trajectory with my career, but so I am involved with the University of Western Australia and Telethon Kids Institute still, and I am still involved with the Life Course Center, which aims to reduce the cycle of deep and persistent disadvantage in Australia. But I'm more now involved with School Mental Health Ontario, which is an organization that supports all 72 of the school boards in Ontario to provide multi-tiered, identity-affirming mental health supports to every student in Ontario, and there's over 2 million of them. And so I do lead up the research, evaluation, and monitoring area there. So this is relevant to both mental health implementation and bullying prevention. So I'm going to just briefly give you this overview then. Why don't these programs, interventions work very well? And I won't have a definitive answer. Other people will have perspectives, of course. And then I'm going to get us thinking a bit about implementation science and about the concept of buy-in specifically. I'm going to look at school leadership or principles and buy-in. I'm going to talk a bit about attitudes and moral engagement, talk about norms and norm perceptions, and then I'm going to put a tentative model together of the psychology of the buy-in process for bullying prevention programs. And hopefully it'll inspire someone in the room to write a grant. At least to write a grant, if nothing else. Okay. I've also been racing. I've talked twice already today, and it's been extremely fast. So I've committed myself to going a little slower right now. I believe there's supposed to be a timer functioning here, or they've maybe decided to just take the clock off and let me talk as long as I want to. Okay, so Gaffney, Toffee, Farrington, if you're in the research field and around bullying, you know at least 2 of those or 3 of those names very well. Very recent meta-analysis of the efficacy, how well, so I shouldn't watch that clock too closely because it's just showing me a lot of zeros now. So. The meta-analytic odds ratio across all of the bullying intervention programs that have been done to date, and this has been going on for, 20, 30 years, let's say, is 1.309. Now, what is that? That's obviously a number that doesn't mean much to most people, but they kindly do this. Imagine 200 students in a condition, experimental condition, 200 students in a control condition, okay? In the control schools that haven't had the intervention, you would have, let's say, 55 bullies, students who engage in bullying, if you don't like to use the term bully, and 145 those students in the control condition, okay? But in the intervention conditions, on average, you're talking about 45 bullies instead of 55. Okay? Now, if you were an optimist, Were you to be an optimist, you'd say, well, that's great. That's 10 fewer bullies per 200 kids, and that's not nothing. And it's not nothing, it's great. But it's also not like, wow, we've solved this. And I was talking to a colleague yesterday night at dinner. We're really understanding the mechanisms better. But our intervention programs, there's no trend in them getting stronger as we go. So there's a bit of a conundrum there. And so what I want to talk about a little bit is how important implementation might be to think about in this process. Because if we go back to that slide, if it's true that we have evidence-based programs that can reduce it from 55 to 45 bullies, and if you want to put the optimist hat back on for fun, temporarily, for instance, then that's good. Then we should be implementing these for sure, right? I mean, if it's the best we got, but if on average they're doing that, that's great. Okay. But there's this problem where we have varying levels of implementation, okay, across the intervention components, and they might explain variability. This is a quote from Gaffney's paper, and at one point in the paper, they have this little part here, which I'll read verbatim. Interestingly, in the discussion this is, a narrative review by Smith et al., 2004, reported that although 14 whole school anti-bullying programs obtained modest effects overall, those that monitored implementation obtained twice. Can I do that? Is that working? Twice. Doesn't sound up from up here. Twice, right? The mean effects, the average effects of self-reported bullying and victimization compared to those that didn't monitor. So keeping track of what you're doing seems to make things work better. Okay, so question, right? So obviously that's a big insight from a paper that was, so that's 2019, the paper. That paper's been highly cited. It's an important meta-analysis. It's had 206 citations since it was published, which is a lot, which is quite a lot, right? Now, if you go on Web of Science, 29 of those papers include the word implementation somewhere, okay? And one of them, Herkama, if you're here, take a bow. No? No? Yes? Oh, really? Seriously? Okay. Thank you. The odds were, I didn't think that would happen. That's great. Wonderful. So only you actually looked at implementation directly. I hope I don't say anything bad about you now. So what happens is often, and reading through those other 28 papers, when they talk about implementation, they're just using the word implementation to means we did it. We did something. Oh, it's done. It's implemented. Okay? It's a fact. The outcomes were measured after implementation of the intervention. Now, I didn't credit that quote. Hopefully that person's not in the room going, hold on, I wrote that line. Okay? And not an object of study. Okay? So I guess now is the time when I'll ask, because gosh, you've been talked at a lot today, and so put up your hand if you've ever, let's say, read a paper that is implementation science as a paper. Okay, awesome. Okay, I'll preach to you converted folks a little bit. Okay, so good implementation isn't just about fidelity, right? Okay, so a lot of this stuff in education and psychology, we borrow from medicine, right? The gold standard, randomized controlled trials. Okay, and so fidelity is like a treatment to the adherence, right? I'll give you the pills. We know the pills work. Just take the pills and you'll be fine, right? So, twere that it were so easy, right? But bullying research, I'm just not seeing that much engagement. When I search through the literature, I'm not seeing a whole lot of deep engagement with implementation science. What I see is the drive to find the right ingredient. Oh, what's the magic bullet? Like, there's got to be something that we haven't thought through clearly enough yet. And that search for the right ingredient, or like the right combination of ingredients, the common elements that work, if we can just discern, boil it down to the elixir, and then we'll have it in place. But I don't know. And I'm familiar with this search because I was there, and now there's supposed to be one of those like remembrance bubbles comes up, like that wavy, right? Gets all wavy. And so I'll just take a quick, this was I was obsessed with this, and I figured I might as well throw it in. Okay, we talk about bullying a lot. Like originally it was like, oh, the bully's the mean guy who throws you in your locker and takes your money, and he's got anger management problems, right? Reactive aggression issues. And then we've all switched over to being like, oh no, they're strategic controllers. They know how to manipulate you and make you think they're sweet, but then you turn your back and they're doing terrible things without provocation and without any kind of, you know. And I'm like, well, hold on. And I read this guy, Richard Howard, in the UK. Richard, you're not, no, he's not. It's not his kind of scene. Anyway, and he was talking about, hold on, when we talk about aggression and violence and stuff, we need to think about it this way. We need to think about, okay, we've got controlled, premeditated, right? Let's go to the criminal sort of language. Premeditated crimes are crimes of passion. They happen in the emotional state that gives rise to them. And so I was obsessed with this model here, where you have like self-control towards the bottom and lack of self-control towards the top, okay? And then the right and left axis here is like, is your emotional sort of tone when you're doing it driven by a bad emotion, an aversive motivation, right? So you fly off the handle, upper right quadrant, you fly off the handle and do something awful to someone else, okay? Or you're really mad, you're humiliated, someone's done something, and you decide to, I'm gonna wait, I'm gonna get you later, right? And then on the other side with appetitive motivations, right? Appetitive refers to like making yourself feel good, your appetites. And so, you know, we think a lot about, okay, yeah, if there's a reward, social status, you know, popularity or lunch money or whatever that reward might be. But then I've heard it at least twice today, there's the what I call the recreational quadrant here, where sometimes you're just having too much fun, right? Like, okay, here's another put up your hand moment. Put up your hand if you've had a giggle fit in the past 2 years. Like a straight up giggle fit that you couldn't, were you, keep your hand up if you were alone when that happened. Okay, take her away. Okay, well, that was more than I expected, because I associate the giggle fit with adolescence. And, you know, so people say it was just a joke, we're just having fun. I don't think they're lying necessarily. I don't think they're morally disengaging necessarily. I think sometimes they get carried away and they do stupid stuff and they do it again the next week because they just get carried away and their self-control is not fully formulated because their prefrontal cortex isn't quite finished being developed because they're only 14 and they've got another decade of prefrontal cortex development to happen. So anyway. So I was interested in all this stuff, and I was like, if we just acknowledge the heterogeneity better, and then we tailored interventions to these different types of instantiations, some people might be more prone to one than the other, and so forth and so on. Okay, so that was my like, oh yeah, so we just need to do it this way, and it'll all work better. Now, I'm not saying it wouldn't. I'm not saying I disown this or anything, but the people paying me right now aren't that interested in this, so I can't keep working on it. So no, but I'm here to talk about something quite different today, okay? And so there are always exceptions to the rule with regard to implementation, right? So I'm saying, oh, we don't think enough about implementation science, but Christina Salmavalli, for instance, is Christina here? You'll hear her talking soon. Hi, Christina. You've done this work too, right? You look at barriers, you look at facilitators. Now, from my own experience, you do that when your intervention failed. Like, this is how I did it. Oh, it didn't really work. Let's go ask them what went wrong, okay? Implementation science is about deciding to do that on purpose from the get-go and not just, as a reaction to having nothing else to publish that would excite the world, I would say. But here, for example, and I'll use this as a springboard, here we have, I don't have the reference up here, Christina, my apologies. But so she did a study, published a study of implementation factors from the Kiva study, which is a large bullying prevention program in Finland, and pointed to some of the problems, as to why it was challenging to get sustained practice, and when you saw sustained practice, what made the difference. And some of the key themes, which I've pulled out here now, are things like people at the school have a motivation to continue delivery. You have administrators enhancing long-term sustainment, so the administrators have bought in somehow. Okay, the organizational culture, the whole group of them support sustainability. And now I have a thing where this is one of the few checklists you're gonna see on my slides. I hate lists because I can't deal with anything not being organized, sort of intellectually organized. And so I see a list and I'm just like, okay, how do we make it into a grid? Can't we put a 2x2 grid together with it? So this is my effort to sort of go through, well, what does it mean then for this list to sit there? Okay, there we are. You'll hear from her more soon. So what I want to talk about then is this stuff, is like when we're thinking about bullying prevention programs, what do we need to think about to make sure they actually work to their full potential in schools? So I'm going to just do a little quick sort of ecological model here. We've got students. Around the students, connecting with the students, are the educators. Around the educators are the school leaders, the principals, etc., headmasters. And then around that, you might have the boards, if you're one of those types of jurisdictions, or the department or the ministry that oversees all of this stuff. So you have, with any sort of program, okay, and then you have peers, and then you have parents, okay, which we won't touch on too much today. But so if you've got a bullying prevention program that you want to get to the students, you know, it's a lot of layers to get through, right? So you've got to get buy-in. You know, everyone's got to buy in. Right? There has to be this cascading process of people going, oh yeah, that's a good idea, let's put money into that. The principal saying, oh, that's a good idea, I'll take some of my time and focus on that. Teachers, etc., etc. Okay, so what's buy-in? What do we, like, so where's the theory of buy-in? So the dictionary, I think this was, told me that buy-in is the acceptance of or willingness to actively support and participate in something. Okay. Now, one thing worth knowing about buy-in, and here's my first reference to an actual implementation science sort of paper, is that as implementation strategies go, some of them are important, okay? And relatively easy to do, relatively easy. So when you're trying to get something in place, the point will become clear in a second here. When you're trying to get something in place, you can do stuff like conduct ongoing training, that's seen as important. You can make that training dynamic, that's seen as important, and it's relatively easy to do that if you're someone who works with schools. And so this knowledge is based on 200 school-based professionals who are working on implementing school mental health processes in Northwest Pacific schools. Aaron Lyon is at the University of Washington, co-director of the SMART Center. So this is some of his work. He had them go through a list of simple implementation strategies like this, thinking about school mental health type stuff, and rank them. Like just give them a rating, how important they are and how feasible they are. Okay? One of the top 5 most important strategies, right? So out of the top 5 strategies that were important according to these experts, one of them was particularly seen as hard, and that was improving the buy-in of implementers. Okay, so this is an area that we know is difficult to do and we know is essential, okay? But there's just not much thinking done about it. So I took the opportunity of this keynote to try to think about it. Okay? Why do some people fail in their willingness to support bullying prevention programs? Right, so Robert Thornburg, is also, hi Robert, another keynote speaker. He'll start a paper or something saying, young people know that bullying is wrong, right? If you ask them, so I think it was Marilyn Campbell in Queensland, Australia, I think it was, young people, if you ask them, is bullying morally acceptable? They'll say, no, it's not. But yet, we have 30% of people reporting, the rates are still high, so people know it's wrong. Okay, the same thing with bullying prevention, right? Most school leaders would probably say, yes, it's important to do bullying prevention, but that doesn't mean it actually gets done. So when you ask educators, so this is me trying to glean through the research to do a little bit of a bespoke lit review for this day. Teachers who see their principal as supportive report greater self-efficacy, right? To work with perpetrators of bullying, right? And they report greater school-wide collective efficacy. Efficacy is just the fancy word for they feel like they can do it, okay? And so you see this time and again in implementation failure papers of barrier. Anytime people are reporting on barriers and you ask the teachers, it's like, my principal's not behind it, so we don't get it done. Okay. So teachers who feel an absence of support from the top levels, they're less likely to intervene in bullying incidents. Okay, so we know that. And teachers report greater self-efficacy, and that other teachers will respond to bullying when they perceive the leader's support to be strong. Okay, so we can see how important it is for school leaders to be verbally, explicitly supportive of what's happening in terms of bullying prevention. Okay, so there's a puzzle here. I could have focused this whole talk on teachers themselves, because there's another question mark there, and there was someone who asked me that question earlier, and we'll touch a little bit on teachers, but I want to move it up that level as well. Okay, so I want then to focus particularly on this question of school leaders. All right, so you can tell already that I'm not going to like this slide, right? Because it's got 2 sets of dot points on it. So people have talked to principals, not very often, but there are some studies out there that interview school leaders, and so what can we get from then? So principals are more likely to believe bullying prevention is effective if, sorry, I'm going to do this the way my brain wants to do it. They believe bullying to be more prevalent in the United States, and they believe bullying to be more prevalent in their own school, and they believe violence in the local neighborhood is more prevalent, and they report more incidents of bullying in their school. So if all of those things happen, then that makes them more likely to believe bullying prevention will be effective. Okay. And then they're more likely to form a committee. Sorry, is Dake here? I don't know who this person is, but again, it's always dangerous to be talking about people's work when you're up here, isn't it? Okay, they're more likely to form a committee. So what about action, right? So we face this problem all the time with self-report. We're all, like, researchers are always saying, okay, yeah, but it was self-report, so there's the chance of social desirability coming into it. And then it's good in this sense because if you're asking them, have you taken this concrete step? They're put their money where their mouth is, as it were. So, right? So they're more likely to form a committee to deal with bullying if they've perceived bullying to be a problem in the school. But whoa, look at this. If they've had violence prevention training or bullying prevention training, they're 5 to 6 times more likely to have that committee set up in the school, okay? So one key takeaway here from what we've seen so far, teachers are saying we don't know what to do if the leaders aren't supporting it, and then the leaders are saying we're seeing that they're more likely to take serious action, right, if they've had that training. So if you're running a bullying prevention program, okay, and you're not looping in the school leaders, are you making, how interactive shall I make it? A mistake, B, not a mistake. Okay, so there's one. Anyone? B? Anyone going? No. So it seems like a takeaway that, okay, you're going to want to include the school leaders here. That seems powerful. But I want to think a little more carefully about the process then. And so what I'm introducing here is the theory of planned behavior, which is used in health sciences perhaps more than education. It's trying to get at behavior change. So we'll walk through this a little bit. And this is sort of the standard theory of planned behavior, and I'll complicate it a little bit, but not too much. But the idea here is that if you have an attitude supportive of the behavior that you're thinking about changing, okay, then that makes you a little more likely to think about changing. And if you see the norms around you or everyone else, like let's take smoking as an example, right? So you've heard that smoking's bad for you, because we've seen massive social change around smoking of nicotine, right? So it's a good example. Smoking's bad for you, it's stupid to do that because it causes cancers. Okay, so there's your attitude, okay? And then as everyone starts quitting smoking, you start to feel more and more isolated, okay? So your subjective norms, it seems like you're a weirdo because you're still smoking, okay? And then perceived control. If you can't have any power over the situation, then, if someone's sticking cigarettes in your mouth every hour and forcing you to smoke them, then you can't change anyway, right? Luckily, that doesn't happen very often, isn't it, Dorothy? No, it doesn't happen often. Okay, but that's the general theory of planned behavior and what it looks like. Okay, I want to focus now on attitudes and try to complicate things a little bit more. Okay, so here's a study of teachers. This study, Desmet, I don't know if I'm saying that right, again, looking through the room, okay, referred to them as disengaged educators. They don't rate bullying as a big problem, and they tend to expect that it will resolve itself if ignored. So these are educators that the people in this room are concerned about. Why would they think that? And these will look familiar to Robert and others in the room, perhaps. They would espouse attitudes like this. Many youngsters who are bullied provoked it themselves. So I'm now looking for someone specific in the room. Yeah. And attitudes like this. It's not my responsibility to make sure students feel safe at school. So this was an item that had been flipped around. So now these look familiar to some people because they're considered classic moral disengagement mechanisms. So this is an example of victim blame on the one hand. You provoke it yourself, you get what you deserve. And diffusion of responsibility. It's not my responsibility, it's the parent's responsibility, for instance. So moral disengagement isn't quite just attitudes, though. So moral disengagement are attitudes that serve a function. And the function is to make you feel like you can get away with something that you know is morally not the best thing to do, but you've got your reasons. And so some of those reasons, this is the work of Albert Bandura, the great Canadian, or Albertan, technically, psychologist. And some of those are regarding how you think about the victim of bullying, right? So if you have dehumanization or othering going on, okay, then it's easier to do something terrible to that person. And of course, Bandura pulled from the history of the 20th century. It was pretty easy to pick out examples of this, but obviously he, would talk about the Nazis and, show us. So that enables people, if you don't see them as fully human, it enables you to do things that you might not otherwise do. Okay? There's also ways to reduce your personal agency in the situation. So displacing responsibility onto someone else. It's the parent's job, not my job. Right? Or diffusing responsibility. If everyone is responsible, then no one's responsible sometimes. Okay? And then there's also mechanisms that have to do with reconstructing the behavior. And so if you say, we're just joking around, right? Just joking around is sort of seen as one of those classic euphemisms. It's a euphemistic way of talking about what you're doing. It makes it sound like no big deal. Or you have a moral justification. Like this is in bullying, what's a good one in bullying? Moral justifications enable us to do a lot in general, right? If you're at war with another country, you're killing people, right? Which generally, if most of the religious traditions we come from view that as a bad thing to do, but we do it because it's justified under a larger moral obligation at that point, okay? Or you can make an advantageous comparison. Like, you think bullying's bad at this school, you should see what it's like down the road, yeah? So those are pretty handy as well. And all of these serve to reduce your own sense of guilt, your own sense of shame or remorse, or the idea is that it lowers the bar for you to do stuff that otherwise emotionally you would feel a self-reprehension or a self-loathing kick in. Okay, and then the last set of mechanisms are about reframing the consequences. I want to make it more interactive. Is that okay? So anyone think of an example, like a phrase that would, like, disregarding the consequences or distorting the consequences. There's a classic one around bullying that gets pulled out. My uncle has pulled it out before. You're overreacting, it wasn't that bad. Yeah, you're literally gaslighting at that point into it. You're overreacting. There's another one, super famous. It's not the one I was looking for, but thank you for playing. Yes? It'll toughen them up. Yeah, that kind of stuff. It builds character. Yeah. And maybe it does build character as long as the person survives it, right? So maybe that's true, but not something we want to recommend. Okay, so this type of work around moral disengagement has been something that's been studied in psychology in particular for the past decade quite a lot. Robert and I and Christina have worked on a paper that looked at some of these processes and found that in looking at bully victims, those who are both bullied and victimized, and I feel like I'm the first person today to mention that possibility, that you can be both at the same time. That sometimes you're bullied, and you're also bullying other people. So the students who are involved in both are a little bit different from people who just do the bullying and never have to deal with it on their own end. And so anyway, I won't go into that because that's not what the keynote's about, but it's worth, I think, contemplating that distinction always worth contemplating that distinction, I think. Okay. So with regard to moral disengagement as a barrier for buy-in, if we're thinking about school leaders then, it may be that we have, these kinds of pro-bullying attitudes that might be held by the school leader or by the educator themselves, right? They may believe in their heart of hearts, as we say, that if you look like that, you're just asking for it, right? That kind of stuff. That might be there. They may never admit to it, and we talked in another session about implicit, measuring implicit beliefs, like we talk about it in racism, implicit racism, but I haven't seen much work around implicit beliefs around bullying, for instance, okay? Or, it may be that a school leader, genuinely believes that this sort of teasing isn't actually going to harm anybody, but maybe it is, right? Or it distorts the character. So the classic sort of distorts the consequences, the classic builds character type of belief system. But you can also have moral disengagement around bullying prevention programs, okay? So you can have moral justifications, and now I've never measured this, I'm just spitballing here. A school principal might genuinely believe, yes, bullying's bad, but it's not the school's job to do that. We're here to educate. This is about reading and writing, and you take your 4th R, and we got enough R's already. We don't need another R in our school, right? Advantageous comparison I already sort of touched on. Compared to that school, we're doing great, right? So we don't need to do any more. We've got enough going on here. Displacement of responsibility, right? Diffusion of responsibility. There is already a lot out there about bullying being bad and about stopping bullying. Schools are busy. These things are all true, and I don't want to sound like I'm coming down hard on principals or school leaders, ever, because it's a terrible job. I mean, it's a lovely job if you like it, but really. Teaching kids is really, really hard, and running a school is really, really hard, and the expectations are ridiculous. And I'll just take my soapbox moment to say, it's a crazy system. Like, why do we do this at all? Oh yeah, I got applause for that line, right? Let's take all the kids of the same age and put them in a group together all day. Like, it has great economic advantages to the parents and the society, and it does a great job of socializing kids in a certain way, but it's not a great way to learn, in my memory, Anyway, so yeah, it's a hard job. If you think they've got it easy, do it for a day, just a day. Just volunteer in a classroom for a day and see if you actually still think like summer's off, make it all worth it or whatever. Because it's crazy. Yeah, crazy. So, but nobody's perfect, so I'm going to keep picking on you. It can happen. You're here. Obviously, this isn't you I'm talking to. So, okay. Okay, so that's attitudes, yeah, but a little more. Like moral disengagement's a little bit more than just an attitude. Okay, it's actually an attitude that leads to a whole process that does something to behaviors. And now I want to talk a little bit about norms, subjective norms. Okay. Okay, you can have, thinking about norms, so like what norms are a weird sort of thing because you can think about them on a lot of different levels. So you can think about norms about bullying as an act. Are those students targeted in bullying outside the school leader's boundaries of what is normal? Okay, so like there are the normal kids from my perspective, and then there's the sort of freaky kids who are a bit weird kind of thing. So there's that, which we've already touched on a little bit. Okay. There's the principal's perceptions, or the educator's perceptions of the norms around power and strength. So the definition of bullying, as I know it to be, and everyone keeps talking about the new definition, the definition as I know it to be has to do with power imbalance, okay? That you have more power than the person you're bullying. Power is a complicated topic too, though. It's not just popularity, it's not just physical strength. If you're someone willing to do whatever, regardless of whether you get in trouble, that's power too, isn't it? So you could be a smaller, less popular person and wield the power of not giving a rat's. Where do I go with this one? Right? Just not giving a rat's. I'll just stop it with that, okay? So, but the principal has their own sort of norms around what's normal behavior, what's acceptable behavior, presentation, attire, haircuts, face tattoos, pro, anti, etc., right? You have norms around bullying prevention programs. What are all the other school leaders talking about? Do they talk about it like it's something really important? Or when you get together at the school principals club, is it sort of like, oh, yeah, we don't have time for that? So it becomes normalized, perhaps. I don't know. We don't have the research. Are the other schools enacting bullying prevention programs? Right? This is all in lieu of a mandate from some governmental body that tells you have to be doing it. Right? This is assuming it's voluntary. Okay, so I want to do a shout out to Kevin Kumashiro from the 2019 WABF, whose talk I watched and enjoyed immensely. So there's norm criticality that we need to think about too. So this is a quote from him. I hope I can do it justice. What we actually need to do is to look at what is bullying policing. Sorry, there is a typo there. We need to look at what bullying is policing, is what that should say. So he has made a very good argument, and it's on YouTube. You can go watch it tonight, in case you haven't had enough keynotes today. So he's talking about bullying policing larger norms of homophobia, of patriarchal structure, right? These large power, these Bronfenbrenner-y macro level things get reenacted in the day-to-day interactions of people, right, at the school. And the teachers do or don't turn a blind eye to it because they do or don't implicitly support it. And the principal same. Right? So bullying then is this reproduction of the power structures that exist, in his view. And it's a really interesting argument. I think it well warrants listening to him present it in full, because he's quite brilliant with it. Okay, so going back to some of this stuff. So principals are more likely, and I'm just pulling this back up to think about it through with you, they're more likely to believe bullying prevention is effective if they believe bullying is more prevalent in the United States, they believe bullying is more prevalent in their school, okay? So what we're perhaps seeing here is an increase, and I'm gonna say probably an accuracy in the actual norms, okay? Because there's always the question of like, what's normal? There's a perception of what's normal, and then if you actually went out and measured it all, is it actually correct to what's actually the case in the real world, okay? So what we might see here then is, people are more likely to act if they're seeing the norms to be more, more salient. There's a more serious problem here. Oh yeah, we need to act, right? So this is a shifting of the norms. Okay. Just a little brief sidetrack then into pluralistic ignorance as well. And you'll see in a second why I absolutely have to do this. Adolescents, so this is Sandstrom and Bartini, adolescents, quote, exhibit an overarching tendency to view themselves as more pro-social than their classmates, thereby underestimating the extent to which their classmates share their pro-social views. I've seen this in my 16-year-old daughter, shout out to Veronica, but for some reason, and I don't really understand why it is, there is this gap. People think, the other people must think bullying's okay. They must feel that way. Well, why do you think that? Well, it's just the perception. And so the bigger the gap, these researchers have said, in thinking yourself to be more pro-social than the rest of your class, okay, the more likely you are to be a passive bystander. So if you think you're more pro-social than everyone else, you're less likely to act. I don't know if that's a contradiction or a paradox, but okay. It's in the ballpark. Okay, and this is why I have to talk about this especially. This is Antonio Camacho Lopez. He's a postdoctoral student who's living in Perth, doing a postdoc quote with me while I live in Canada. And he's doing work around norm misperception. So he has had students rate their own behavior and that of their classmates, okay, regarding behaviors around the witnessing of bullying. So joining into the bullying, standing by and doing nothing, bystanding, or defending or supporting the target of the bullying. And so his work, yet to be published, we're working on it. Students who overestimate the true rates of joining in are more likely to report that they would join in. Okay. Students who overestimate true rates of bystanding are more likely to report that they would bystand. And students who underestimate the true rates that their peers would defend are less likely to defend. So across the types of behaviors, we're seeing this consistent pattern that if you're misaligned from what the actual norm of this behavior is, then it has bad effects on your likelihood of reacting in the way that we would want students to react. So, but what about school leaders then? So hypothesizing by analogy then, if you overestimate how much other school leaders ignore bullying, it might just be a way to ignore bullying yourself, okay? So information that addresses that misperception might be potent, and I'm just going back to this slide again for a second. School leaders are more likely to conduct a survey if they'd had that bullying prevention, so that the role of highlighting the problem leading to action. So that's why I just revisited this slide. Now, another piece of work from Washington State with Aaron Lyons' lab. So they have a study that's getting a little old now, but he's doing a little more work around principles as well at the moment. So they trialed, before they set up an intervention, a universal student mental health intervention in this case, but it's relevant to what we're talking about. Before they implemented that program in schools, they ran a sort of pre-intervention for the school leaders and educators called the supportive beliefs intervention. Okay. So this trial was interesting and rare, and I think is perhaps the sort of thing we need to think about doing a lot more often. So the fidelity of implementation was significantly associated with their changes in pre and post attitudes around those sorts of beliefs, right? Around the supportive beliefs for student mental health being an important thing to prioritize, okay? So then, for example, teaching students how to behave appropriately at school is the parent's responsibility or student's responsibility, not mine. So changes in those sorts of beliefs were predicting how well the intervention got implemented, okay? Which is, I think, a useful sort of thing to consider. So addressing educators' beliefs prior to their social, emotional, behavioral intervention reduced staff resistance. It reduced ambivalence about the work, the extra work, because it's almost always extra work too, right? It's not like you don't have to teach math today because you're helping out with that. It's usually almost always an extra ask the teachers just put on their own workload because they're good humans when they say yes to that sort of work. Okay, so these supportive beliefs they saw increases from pre to post, and so really that actually accounted for a lot of the variance. If you're a Stats-y person, you'll look at that and go, oh, 64%, okay. But of course, even with that, about 15% of the schools didn't change, and in those schools that didn't change their beliefs, you didn't see a whole lot of implementation progress either. Okay, so I just then want to try to put a little bit of this together with the time I've left. So perceived control, I'm moving it around, so I'll just start with that there. So I'm actually putting that sort of here between intention and actual action as a moderator, but that's not important for right now. But what we then have is, so we have these attitudes that we know can be problematic and that can lead to moral disengagement. And then we have these subjective norms that exist and potential misperceptions in how accurate those norms are to the real world. And those things can be relevant to bullying in general, or they can be relevant to school as a venue to do something about bullying versus anywhere else in the world as a venue to do something about bullying, okay? And then there will be also these norms about the wielding and the use of power, okay? And this is where it gets, I think, really complicated, but I'll just stick it up there for a moment. So what I want to then try to leave you with is this fairly hideous looking thing. So school leaders, those activities those decision processes are going on for school leaders, but they're also going on at every teacher's level too, right? So you have this ecology where the relationship between the school leader and what they want to get done and the teacher and what they're willing to get done can clash, or they can be harmonious, okay, depending on where they're at with this decision-making process around changing how they do and think about things, okay? And then I've just stuck Bronfenbrenner's terms on there as a reminder. Also that the mesosystem refers to the interaction of two microsystems. Okay, thanks. I just always have to reinforce that point if you're a Bronfenbrenner person. Okay, and so I'm going to just leave, and we'll have a little bit of time for questions and so forth, but if you need a little more information to sway school leaders, Lacey and Cornell. Any Lacey or Cornell in the room at the moment? You recognizing your work? No? Rates of passing in algebra, geometry, English, reading and writing, earth science and biology are higher in high schools with less teasing and bullying. Okay? What more do you need to know if you're a school leader? Right? Rates of passing in algebra, geometry, English, reading and earth science are higher in high schools with more anti-bullying program elements in place. Okay? So it pays off. So that should be enough. This will be on YouTube or something, so I think we're done. Hopefully that's enough. Okay, and thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate it. So now you have to line up, apparently, behind those two microphones if you want to ask questions. This sounds pretty fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great.
that's the plan. Any questions? Justin, do you have any questions?
The one thing I was thinking about was there's this term called, I think it's social referencing and modeling. Social referencing and modeling involves how individuals in unfamiliar or ambiguous situations look around them in order to determine how to react, because again, it's foreign to them. Mm-hmm. And so thinking about school leaders, you would say that, all right, that makes sense, but then since bullying has been on their radar and an element on their agenda for so many years, you think that they would just know that I've got to do something about this, especially because the research is pretty clear about how, like you showed in the last slide, bullying absolutely affects academic achievement and attendance and all these other sort of goals that we have, whether it's morale, worker satisfaction, teacher satisfaction. So yeah, it's like you mentioned, a paradox as well. Some of it seems very simple and basic and would prompt us, compel us to action, and yet we do have passivity in the way of these administrators not doing anything, or maybe they're just overwhelmed.
Yeah. Okay, we bought some time. I want to thank everyone who actually came and stayed for the talk, because it's been a long day, I'm sure, for everyone. Question? Hi.
Your talk is absolutely amazing, and I am going to make use of your insight. There's something that happens in the United States that I would like people to be aware of so that it doesn't happen in other countries, because this has been a major disincentive for schools to do anything about bullying. Yeah. So in 2010, in the US, they launched greater efforts to address bullying. If you look at the data on the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, there's been no decrease in bullying whatsoever, and there's an increase now. Right. What also happened in 2010 was a recommendation that states implement in their statutes a requirement that schools annually report the number of bullying incidents in their school. Many states have done this. In New York, the comptroller looked at the data, and New York did do this, and they found that after their Dignity Act went into place, 71% of New York City schools reported 0 incidents of bullying, okay?
What a solution.
So, yeah, we got rid of all bullying in New York City, right?
Wow.
Okay. In 2015, a reporting requirement was included in the Every Student Succeeds Act, but only for children who are in protected classes. And if you go to the website for that, it's, oh boy, OCR data, something, sorry. Find me if you want that. If you go there and look at any district, what you're going to see is a profound under-reporting of these incidents. I am on a Facebook group with over 200,000 principals. Yeah. And my kind of anecdotal qualitative analysis of comments on the group, in this group, is they do not refer to these incidents as bullying. They mislabeled them.
Intentionally.
And then they rationalize this isn't bullying, because bullying is any action that caused a substantial disruption in the school for which I suspended a student. So if it's not at that level, it's not bullying, and I'm going to label that something else. Anyway, so basically, that's what's going on in the United States. If that provision tries to come up in any other country and you think, oh, we ought to do this, this will help hold schools accountable, my name's Nancy Willard, contact me, I'll get you all the data.
Yeah.
And so that's one key factor why we're not having success.
Yeah, well, it makes me think of behavioral economics and the question of incentives. So what's the incentive to report one way or the other at that point? So yeah, so you can get unintended consequences arising, and this is what you think has happened.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Question? Okay, wonderful.
Your model was fascinating and interesting. It makes me think about a lot of million different things, so I thought I would just really complicate it for you. As our schools become more diverse, because people live near each other and do what people do, if you add in differences in the population where schools, say, are 45% Latino American, 45% Euro American, how do you think that's going to play out in terms of these attitudes and beliefs and sense of efficacy?
Okay. You want me to answer now, do you?
No, I'm sure you need a
Well,
week to...
I don't know. I mean, the first thing that pops to my mind is someone hopefully can remember it better than I do, but you know, people who live in cities are more tolerant of diversity than people who aren't exposed to diversity every day. And so maybe it's not a bad thing. But then I'm also thinking Tracy Vaillancourt's meta-analysis. Oh, I'm trying to remember the proportionality, like it becomes very idiosyncratic perhaps too, to the school or to the community of what the relationships are. I don't have a good answer for you though, as to how that would fit into it, but it's a whole other layer or lens that we have to be thinking about. So I appreciate you raising it, but no, I can't give you a good answer on that offhand. Yeah.
You just gotta make a grid first.
Hey? Yeah, I need a grid. Right now it's just a list in my head. I have to gridify it. Yeah. All right, well thanks.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks so much and enjoy your break.
Appreciate that.
Okay, great.
Outstanding job, Kevin. Appreciate you sharing your insights.